Hello there, great person, and welcome back to Let's Dive into Warhammer 40,000. So the Dark Eldar, the Drukhari, have won last time. So I will close the poll and set up another, and you can vote on, Tau, Tyranids, or Orcs. And I forgot the Orcs, so I already have a video for the Orcs. I found it, so you might might choose that one next, but who knows who will win? Perhaps the Tyranids will win. Yeah. So today the video I'm gonna watch is again by Luetin because we will just like keep going with these for the races, and then I will change the creators and stuff because there have been many great recommendations of other creators as well. But I think for getting into all of this, I think Luetin was quite or is quite a good starting point. So, without further ado, we're gonna get into the video. The video is called "The Drukhari Dark Elder Race Overview: Lore and History." And if you like the original video, of course, go to his channel and like it. It's gonna be in the video description. And also like this video if you like my reaction, and consider liking, subscribing, all the stuff. But I now want to see what Dark Elder are because people have told me gonna be hard stuff. So let's see how bad it's gonna get. Then let's go. And it's apparently 1.5 hour long, so I will probably do some parts of this, and like always, you know. Oh, okay, that's lovely. Yeah, yeah. Sounds a bit Slaneshy. The Dark Elder of Commorragh. Commorragh.
There are some things in the great and vast darkness of the galaxy that for humanity are best left unknown. For others, the pain inflicted by those most deplorable of creatures goes far, far beyond the physical. There are some within the Imperium who, through no fault of their own, are exposed to and understand the suffering inflicted by the darkness of the warp and the chaotic entities and beings that existed within that parallel space, but they are not the only ones who carry darkness within them. There are others who are in many respects equally depraved, figures who live each
Oh,
day and
hello,
every
mate.
day to inflict suffering, but not just pain, not just tedious, banal pain through physical agony. No. There are those who
Immortal
have made the
Joe.
suffering of others a culture in its own right, whose citizenry bathe in the distilled pain, despair, and agony of others. The Eldari, otherwise known as the Eldar, aspire to somehow salvage and then reclaim their lost glory and respect throughout the galaxy. There also exists somewhere out there in the void their polar opposites, and they are known to the Imperium as the Drukhari, or more crudely, the Dark Eldar. And for these
Okay.
lost souls, unlike their brethren, they have no such laudable aspirations.
Oh, great.
Instead, they're content to wallow and saturate their minds in the darkness and nightmarish orgy of pleasure combined suffering that once first unleashed the thirsting god of Slanesh upon the galaxy. The Chaos God who, in
Okay.
its violent birth, obliterated the Eldar civilization as it was and brought an end to the Age of Strife. Where the Proto-Drukhari destroyed their own race in this moment, they unwittingly enabled humanity to be reborn into a new age where the Emperor of Mankind would rise to power and his warriors step out to dominate the galaxy as part of a new Imperium of Man.
Okay, so let me get this straight. Those are the Elder that were like, yeah, you know, all this horrible stuff we're doing. We're gonna keep doing that. Let's go. Okay. So what am I gonna see today? What Slanesh weird power stuff will I see today? Am I ready? I don't know. But yeah, sounds horrible already.
Unlike the vast majority of the Eldar though, some saw the horror that lay on the horizon and made preparations accordingly. Others were lucky enough to find themselves protected by a coincidental alignment of perverse necessity. This is the story of those depraved beings. For today, we will learn finally about the Dark Eldar.
Oh god, what is your crown or whatever thing? Oh, the fall. Okay, we know about the
Now, the
fall.
obvious place to begin is, strangely enough, at the beginning. Except I've already talked at
Why?
length about the
Strangely,
first
of course.
origins of the
That makes
Eldar,
sense.
their early history, their mythology, and how they're able to assert dominance over the galaxy. If you wish to learn
Oh,
more,
hello.
see my Dark Origins Part 2 video, which is linked at the end of this one. Also, people often ask questions like, what were the Eldar doing for the many millennia that led up to the expansion of humanity during the Dark Age of technology?
Yes.
And the answer, of course, is this time is greatly clouded and very uncertain to us. However, we do have some glimpses and some understanding about this time. It's possible, though, that similarly to the Tau and humanity, the Eldar were in fact so arrogant in their great power that they underestimated humanity's ability to develop, and by the time they had noticed how powerful we had become, there was little they could do about it. No overt documentations exist that point towards an Eldar-human conflict during the Dark Age of technology, and as humanity existed at a much higher and more developed plane of existence during this time, it seems likely that they held a guarded, but perhaps cordial, interaction. There was an Eldar Shadow Seer, Lariel Ray, who mentioned in an offhand comment that the Eldar had defeated the ancestors before the time of the Imperium, but it was no more than that. A dismissive, provocative comment that could be taken as an off-the-cuff insult more probably than as a fact.
Yeah, that sounds like made up stuff somehow. Like, if that's the only time we ever hear of this, and this person was like, we have beaten you before, foolish humans. That might be just their way of, I don't know, making themselves seem stronger or something like that, you know? So, I mean, why would we believe that claim?
One thing to consider, though, is that in the time of humanity's rising, the Eldar were probably already on something of a slide down and were very preoccupied with this, and far less interested in some focused sense of what other races were doing. They considered them unimportant and most certainly not a threat. I must, as always, point out that this is entirely my own speculation, but as usual, I feel it's reasonably logical of an assumption given what we know combined with no other substantially contradictory evidence. The point being that the Eldar were just for the longest time doing their own thing. The warp had been locked away, and that's another thing I need to talk about some more. The Necron were sleeping, and this left the Eldar with complete dominion across the galaxy.
Yeah.
Like all empires, they slowly, over vast periods of time, began to slide into a slower, decadent, more moral decay, and that was apparently left unchecked. And by the time it had become established enough to be obviously offensive to many within Eldar society, it was already too entrenched to do anything about it. But the Eldar were truly masters of all. Like the humanity in the Golden Age, they had very little to worry about. Their technology was so advanced, they were able to basically print matter. They had all manner of machines to do any kind of work which was required, and on top of this, they feared for nothing, which...
Okay, yeah. So they've got 3D printing that 3D prints from energy, I assume. I mean, that's pretty powerful. Is that like the replicators in Star Trek? So, I mean, you can produce a lot of stuff with that technology. So, how did they do that though? And yeah, I mean, of course, we will not know, but that's cool.
You would expect from a race which were able to destroy planets and then rebuild them at will. Any enemy, to their mind, could be easily extinguished. In fact, discoveries have been made that suggest the Eldar during this golden period had developed their understanding of psychic power and how this can be channeled into the material realm. That they actually had developed technology whereby they were able to simply think of a thing and it would be born into existence.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably a combination of the machines that print matter and their psychic powers that enabled them to do so. So, I mean, that's pretty logical and pretty powerful. So,
and this could be, say, an infantry grav tank, a titan, a starship, theoretically even an entire planet. So they would connect themselves to this machine, they imagine this thing, and there it is. Now the power of this is obviously terrifying to even consider. Now if you want to read more about that specifically, and I'll say thanks here to the community who helped me to pinpoint that as the book Fist of Demetrius, because I knew I could remember it from somewhere, but I couldn't remember that specific book. This is where some Imperials find an ancient complex with a machine that allows things to be materialized seemingly out of thin air. It's an interesting point of the lore, so it's worth looking up. It's a good read.
That also would make for a good game. Like, you are one of the Imperial guys and you go into this facility and weird stuff starts to attack you, and then in the end it's like a half-rotten Elder corpse, like still connected, and it's like flickering in and out of existence, and that's why it produces horrid stuff. And yeah, that sounds lovely. That sounds very lovely. So I would like a movie about that as well.
The main thing though to understand is that the Eldar before the fall were an extremely advanced race both in mind, spirit and physically. They have senses far beyond a human, they can move like lightning faster than human eyes are barely able to perceive, and their emotions are so strong if a human had to try and process them, it would either send them insane or they'd just break down into mental jelly. Now unbeknownst to the Eldar, who had for millions of years existed with the warp as their source of power, things were stirring in the Immaterium.
Yes, they were
dark
stirring.
things. And it's important to remember that what feeds the warp the most is excess of emotion. So many people are quick to assume that the Eldar played a great role in creating the dark gods of chaos through the war in heaven. And the best assumption about this is that this is not entirely untrue, but it's also not accurate to say this definitively as just a default assumption. The Eldar, you see, because of their extremely powerful emotions, have always been aware of this having some level of destructive capability.
Okay, interesting.
And so they learn to control this, both in battle and throughout their lives. Another thing to remember is that when humans die, their souls feed into the warp. Pre-fall for the Eldar, this was not the case. Eldar souls are not the same as human souls, and the Eldar would be reborn over and over. So for them, events like the war in heaven did not contribute billions and billions of souls to the warp, and at the same time neither did the Necron tier, because their souls were consumed by the Catan. So this is a fundamental error people make when they're assuming that the war in heaven created the Chaos Gods, where nearly every aspect of it appears to have been not that significant in contributing to the warp. Now, it undoubtedly will have had some effect, of course, because the Catan were going around destroying planets. However, they were also feeding off of the souls of the living creatures there. This is another mistake often people make when they say, well, the Catan were destroying all these planets and it was destruction everywhere. How could that not have fed into the warp? Again, because that was the whole reason why the Catan were attacking those planets, was to siphon the soul and the energy of the living beings. So that stuff didn't go into the warp.
I'm not sure. Like, yes, they eat stuff, but they probably only eat half. I still like the theory that that the war in heaven birthed corn. Because, like, yes, I mean, if there's a giant thing eating you, I mean, there are people that die without being eaten, and those are probably enough. Like, if this spread through the whole universe, why not? I mean, I don't know. But tell me what you think in the comments. Do you think that it's improbable that's the war of heaven that birthed corn, or do you think he's wrong here?
Of course, their suffering and anguish and all these other things did, that undoubtedly contributed and fed into the warp there. But again, where did it reach a tipping point? How long did it take to reach the level where Chaos Gods became active? We don't know this. The point is that the Eldar up until the dawn of mankind would have certainly had some impact on the warp, but despite their powerful emotions, it seems that this was less of an impact than when humans began slaughtering each other en masse and feeding souls directly into the warp and breeding like rabbits in the process. While all humans, with the exception of gnolls, have some psychic presence, the Eldar, of course,
again, the medieval time stuff. I don't like that aspect, and you've told me that it's old lore, so I will not consider it canon because it makes no sense. Like, how many people were that? 1 million compared to the trillion worlds that birthed Slanesh. You know what I mean? It's like so weird.
Have a powerful psychic presence because of their very nature, and this means that from the warp's perspective, Eldar souls are white-hot, burning beacons, whereas humans are merely tiny distant specks of light, barely more than particles of dust picked out in a beam of light. Except that until the dawn of Slanesh, this had never really been that important, but of course, all that would soon change. Similarly to humanity in its golden age, but perhaps even more so, life for the Eldar at the height of their power was beyond what you could describe as paradise. Their lives were without any kind of stress or trouble. They held total dominion over the galaxy.
Yeah, that's not a good state.
They spent their time indulging entirely in creative pastimes, be they artistic, physical recreation, mental, speculative, philosophical discussions, literature. Their psychic manifestations dealt with everything, and remembering that at this time most of Eldar society was based on planets, not in the craft worlds that we see today.
Yeah, that's so cool, but why didn't they try to get out of the galaxy? Like, we know there's some dark stuff out there, and either they didn't know, so why wouldn't they go out and explore? Like, they seem to be pretty explorery. And if they did know that there's darkness out there, why wouldn't they like take precautions against it? Like, wouldn't that have been something? I don't know.
They also had discovered and learned how to make use of the webway, the vast system of psychic tunnels which exist outside of the materium and immaterium. An important side note, to travel through the webway quickly requires psychic energy, otherwise it will take much more time to traverse. You can still travel through it, but much like any psychic weapon, to get the most power from it, you need to imbue it with psychic energy.
Oh, we didn't know that yet. Or at least you probably did, I did not. So if you want to use psychic weapons, you have to be a psyker, of course, and the better the psyker, the more. I guess there's an upper limit, of course. You know that like the weapon can fire a 10, and if you're a great psyker, you can fire a 10, but normally you fire a 5. You know what I mean? But that's cool. That's a cool detail.
Otherwise, it's just plain and not especially effective. The webway was of course constructed by the old ones, and
Yeah,
the
we
means
know
of its
that.
construction and repair taught to the Eldar. It was believed that they had mapped it to a degree, but this knowledge was deemed so great, it is now only kept in the Eldar Black Library, hidden deep in the webway, its route only known to a select few of their kind. Some even suggest that the webway paths could also stretch forwards and backwards in time. The Eldar
Oh,
themselves understood the
interesting.
danger of this, and so never
What are
used
you,
these
mate?
temporal aspects.
Why is
And
there
there
this
is more to
weird
discuss
thing?
about that, but we'll probably have to get to that another time. The webway though enabled them to travel safely between their worlds, never having to really use space or the warp. And this is another thing people often don't think of when they say, well, how come the Eldar didn't conflict with humanity? Well, for one reason, because they weren't travelling with starships all around the galaxy, and they weren't travelling with ships all through the warp like humanity had to do. Because they did of course have sub-light speed ships, but unlike other races who usually involve the warp to traverse those vast distances, the Eldar have no need to do this. Because why would you travel in real space or warp space across these vast distances when you can just step through the webway and be there in a fraction of the time in total safety?
Yeah, that makes sense. Like they are like, just like insect swarms around globes. Like, you know, every planet has their little elder insect swarm around it that's flying there, but they won't fly in between the spheres because they don't need to. They can just like teleport. So that's cool. Yeah, I like these gates. They remind me of the warp gates though. Like I have to see more depictions of warp and the webways to really like I always like to have different pictures in my mind for different things. So I would like to have different pictures for these two things, like the webway and the warp. So currently it's very similar.
So this is one fairly simple reason as to why Eldar-human interaction early on appears to have been very, very minimal. There's nothing mysterious or misleading about it, they simply didn't encounter one another that often. It's not to say that they never had conflicts or interaction, but such awkward confrontations were clearly minimal, otherwise the consequences would undoubtedly be more well defined even if you're allowing for the Dark Age and the Age of Strife. One key factor as well is that it's not heavily established what kind of overarching societal structure existed in this pre-fall period. One thing we do know is that it seems to have been relatively dispersed.
Yeah, so what were they? Like, were they the Republic of the Galaxy, or were they what? Kingdom? Probably not. Like, what was their structure? How did they organize the society? I don't know that, but perhaps we'll find out, perhaps we will not.
That is to say that it had something of a clan-like culture.
Okay,
this is
clans.
played out as well
Great.
by how this continues to this day, and the craft worlds, the craft world Eldar, are likely the same groups who existed during the pre-fall Eldar culture. And this cultural layout undoubtedly meant that similarly
That
to
makes
our
sense
world
that the
and
craft
fog
worlds
which
are,
exists between countries in terms of just what is going on, meant that as Eldar culture began to change, it likely was not immediately clear that this was happening. And even when things began to grow more extreme, how much this would have been commented to other parts of the Eldar civilization as a whole is really unknown. For the Eldar that live now in the time of the Imperium, this lifestyle of carefree indulgence and technology has been completely lost. If you wanted a modern analogy that's actually pretty apt, you might say that the Eldar in the 41st and 42nd millennia are living lives effectively under psychic lockdown compared to where they were previously. They're largely confined to their craft worlds. They avoid interaction with other races other than their own as much as possible. The Eldar lost so much because, for one, so many of their worlds were annihilated instantly at the birth of Slaanesh, but also because much Eldar tech relies heavily, if not exclusively, on psychic power. Since their beginning, the Eldar had bathed in the warp and focused all their attention on how to use this to build and develop their culture. This is not something to be overlooked. While the Eldar do understand science, as do humans, because they are an advanced race, they
Yes.
never went through that same process of research and industry and mechanical fabrication as humanity has. In fact,
Why
there probably
not?
are things that they don't understand which humans do. They instead base their culture on wraithbone, a psi plastic based on warp energy crafted by what are known as bone singers. Whereas the
Okay,
Imperium is
what?
based on golden age knowledge that is
What?
heavily science and mechanically focused, the Eldar use psychic power and the warp for almost everything. But because they're so weakened and fearful of attracting the attention of Slaanesh, this greatly limits them in terms of what they can
Yeah,
use. They're
that's
still
so
a lot
cool.
more than other races, but nowhere near what they would have been doing pre-fall. And this is one reason why they are so hamstrung in the 41st and 42nd millennium. And then, of course, we come to the Dark Eldar.
Yes,
For the
please.
Dark Eldar, things are very different. Essentially, their fear of Slaanesh led to a very severe decline in the use of psychic power, and this has then caused their ability to effectively, if at all, use psychic power to completely atrophy. Now, as I said before, it's not entirely clear what kind of power structure the Eldar had pre-fall. They appear to have had some sense of nobility, respected elders that seemed somewhat divided by what could be described as clans.
Wow, that
Probably
looks so
the
cool.
best way to think of them is similar to the period of Greek city-states, where there was no real central government, but they were still informally united. Their specific areas were independent. This seems to be somewhat of a reasonable comparison to pre-fall Eldar. It's likely that far back in ancient Eldar history, they were more united as a single people, but over time they fragmented into specific areas, doing their own thing.
Yeah, this looks so cool. Like, I think this is the first full army thing I've seen. Like like I've seen, of course, like armies on advertisement covers, like from what is it called? The shop that sells all the figures. Like I was there once, but I've never seen like a real photo. Like this looks like someone did this by themselves. So this looks pretty cool. Like these giant things, the tank things, I love that. And this weirdo here, I don't know what he's doing or she. Yeah, that looks pretty cool. Though, like, is this how big an army is, or is this a big one, or is this a small one, or whatever? Like, what's going on here? But you will probably tell me, I guess. Yeah,
Basically, they had much
it's so
in
cool.
common, language, collective history, and so on, and for the longest time, there was really no need to form some huge overarching government, because simply there was no need. You usually have some kind of overarching structure to handle things and deal with threats and, make some kind of collective decisions because it's necessary. But the Eldar didn't need this. Their lives were provided for, and within their very specific regions, decisions were probably made by just a council of elders. That's elders, not Eldar. It probably
The
didn't
Eldar
need to be any more
Council.
complicated than that, and if it did, they probably would have grouped up and come together, but most of the time that was never necessary. So as time progressed, this fragmented structure probably made it more difficult for them to develop a consensus on how to avoid the problems that were beginning to occur in their society, in the social sense.
Big
in all
death god
probability, this probably actually made them
of
far
loss and pain.
worse of a problem, with some worlds starting to fall into ruin, others had some sense of what might be coming, but they didn't really see elsewhere what was happening, and others were just in between. So the Eldar have become grossly indulgent as a people, but early on it's nothing more than that. They just have become decadent. And this then arguably inevitably leads many to begin craving such a lifestyle of excess. And to use one of my always favourite close at hand quotes, some Eldar factions or clans sought to become explorers in the further regions of experience. That is to say, they began experimenting with pain as much as pleasure, and perhaps a combination of both. As with all addictive vices, this slowly began to spiral out of control. Those practicing such indulgence lost sight of things and became more and more perverse. Eldar society was overall now rotting morally and ethically, like some virus spreading through their culture. Some worlds were entirely consumed by this attitude, others were less so. But everywhere they had transitioned from lives of relatively innocent excess and indulgence to now truly abhorrent and perverted acts that were intended to be extreme enough to satisfy the ever more desensitized senses of the slowly darkening Eldar. In the beginning, the core of Eldar society were not distinctly aware of what was happening because much of this slide into depravity was happening behind closed doors.
Yeah, so they all turned into Hellraiser dudes. What were they called? Cenobites. Yeah, they are all turning into Cenobites. Congratulations, Maze, you played yourself.
Cults and strange societies were being whispered about in the streets. We can imagine how such things can happen. It begins with tentative conversations, questions,
Yes,
probing to see
yes.
if you're a good fit for the group. Once trust is gained, you get an invite to a meeting.
Oh
and
man,
it's
what is that? That looks horrifying. Is that a mask? I hope that's a mask and not a face that is distorted and surgically altered. Oh God.
downhill from
That, like, look at, imagine that peering through your window at night. Oh, Jesus Christ.
there. Over time, these
Oh
groups became
man.
more brazen. They might publicly test the waters with their morally questionable activities, seek to diminish it as extreme, so
I
that
mean,
society
she's just
slowly becomes
eating.
numb and
That's
exhausted
okay.
by these conversations about these groups, and a
I
little bit more,
guess.
and a little bit more, and finally it's too late. It would only be those who are known today as the Exodites who started to understand early enough the direction
Oh
things
yeah,
were
I
heading
remember
in. You
those.
could very
They
much
like ran
consider them
away
the
or
doomsday
flew away.
preppers of the Eldar, because they saw the writing on the wall and were basically like, we're getting the hell out of here.
Yeah, we're
and
gonna
began to
bail.
retreat to worlds that were very much on the periphery
Bye.
of Eldar society and the galaxy, selecting worlds to settle on where they could keep well out the way of what was coming. More
Yeah.
than this though, the Exodites were also essentially doom prophets, and as most doom prophets are, they were dismissed out of hand by the majority of society, who just did not want to admit or even consider at such an early stage that they had a major problem on the horizon. And this was one of the weaknesses of the Eldar, that their sheer unbridled arrogance and ego, and as I often say, it's all too commonly the nature of things that people never want to change a comfortable way of life and react to a situation until it is literally too late to do anything about it, and you can take your pick of real world examples because they're so readily available.
Yeah, they are. But like well, like, didn't they read? Like, he said they were philosophical and discussing stuff and such and such. Like, did that bleed out of society? Like, I think even if you're arrogant, you would probably, I don't know. I mean, it's hard. Perhaps they were all idiots in the regard that they didn't see it coming because they thought they were infallible. Yeah, that's pretty bad.
Unfortunately, these doom-mongering calls to the Exodites were brushed off as being either puritanical ranting or a disingenuous project of fear-mongering that would surely not come to pass. The counter-argument of the Eldar pleasure cults would be a, well, what's the worst thing that can happen, rationale. What came
Unfortunate. What's the worst thing that can happen? Oh man, that's so fun. Yeah, about that.
next was the beginning of a total
Great.
breakdown in the Eldar civilization that saw their formerly casually united worlds become more and more polarized, and this is when many began to see that things were not going in a stable direction and began advocating for an end to the excessive lack of self-control that these dark pleasure cults were displaying, and the other side, of course, pointing back ever more viciously, screaming that they could do whatever they want, and regardless, what were they going to do about it anyway?
Yes.
Now, you might have thought that this would be where a civil war could break out, but it
Yes.
seems that the Eldar, trying to avoid a further downward spiral, understood that such a thing was not going to be helpful or improve the situation in any way.
Yeah, they might have birthed a more horrifying chaos god than if they had war as well. Or Korn might have, what do you say? Visited the party as well.
Plus, if that's how things went down, it was probably already then past a point of that being able to constructively save the situation. But arguments begin to break out more and more to try and rationalise things. Some despair about how their lives have no meaning because they no longer seek to move forward or struggle for anything. And while those in the opposite camp would posit that it is in fact exactly their lives of extreme endless experience that must exist to honour those who could not have achieved such things before, and that this was in fact entirely the pinnacle of lifestyle that they had always sought to achieve.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I get the honoring part, but that's also is very arrogant to say, yeah, I'm just honoring the ancestors that like died in the gutter. So I'm gonna celebrate now a lot. You know what I mean? That's so stupid. I don't know. That's really. But why didn't they go out of the galaxy? Like if they say the life has no meaning and they like have everything, if that's the problem, go out of the galaxy into the void and look what other galaxies have. What terrible tyrannies are there? You know what I mean? That's a bit like perhaps some groups did that and didn't come back, and then they were like, yeah, forget about those.
They were doing the right thing, and they should embrace this and continue to push it forward. As things continue to deteriorate though, they of course become progressively worse. You hear descriptions of the darker aspects of Eldar
Oh,
society no longer being satisfied with
he
just
looks pretty headless.
pleasuring and experimenting among themselves. This is where we begin to hear of the earliest gangs of the pleasure cults capturing innocents, dragging them back to be preyed upon, tortured for
great.
days or weeks or months in the most perverse and creative ways imaginable. By now, the Exodite Eldar are long gone, having abandoned their civilization, believing it to be a completely lost cause. This is also where we begin to see parts of Eldar's civilization moving from their planets to resettle further out. We also have the first Guardians who strive to reinforce the traditional Eldar way of a more pure lifestyle, but with violent actions if necessary, but nothing really that amounts to more than just vigilante action.
Yeah, okay, so that's how they like fell, really. I mean, the good ones are gone, and now all that's left is them and their weird things. I'm pretty happy that he doesn't really go into detail how they did the torture stuff. It's probably out there in some books, I guess. Like, like this is like he always just says, yeah, it's pretty bad tortured experiments, and like I can picture some stuff there, but I'm glad that he doesn't dive into this too much. So, yeah, at least that.
Nothing more unified than this. And then you begin to finally see the creation of craft worlds, bastions designed to house only those of pure spirit, created out of a necessity, as their worlds are now being ravaged by those individuals consumed by dark excess. The craft worlds would of course in time become replacements for the broken worlds of the Eldar that now contained little more than the remnants of what wonder and glory had come before.
Yeah.
And as they begin to reach the end of days,
They look
Eldar
very
society is in
insecty
a
as
complete
well.
state of collapse. Many worlds are now in essence entirely consumed by nightmarish horror and dark cults who have turned the once glorious worlds of the Eldar into brutal hunting grounds.
Yeah.
Ruined wastelands of suffering populated by deranged individuals who scavenge night and day in total desperation to feed their insatiable addiction to pleasure and suffering, that they can now only indulge in by the most extreme acts to try and elicit any small sense of feeling. The members of these dark cults have
Yeah, they
become
F
basically
themselves
numb
so
to
bad.
any feeling now, be that pleasure or pain, and this numbness only pushes them further and further to imagine by what means can they possibly feel that rush, that mental saturation of emotion, and their only means to now achieve this is to enact in the truest sense the most unimaginable horrors on their victims.
Yeah, that's like you played yourself. Congratulations, you all played yourselves. Commorragh. Let's go.
As the power of these dark cults continued to grow across the worlds of the Eldar, and as some of their activities became ever more extreme, for whatever reason it was seen as being sensible to relocate into the webway. And this move by some of these cults in what is still essentially the pre-fall toward the webway is what I'll simply refer to from here on as the Dark Eldar, because they then begin to commandeer hidden ports and they set up strongholds at key webway junctions to ensure the security of their debased pursuits.
Okay.
So this is
Interesting.
important
That's
to
cool.
understand because it can sometimes have a sense that the decay of the Eldar was a chaotic anarchy where psychopaths were just running wild, and that's not entirely untrue. However, those at the higher level certainly had a more ordered sense of their debased pleasures in these darkened cults, the
Great.
Dark Eldar. These webway
Great.
junctions and access points were all connected to a vast, sprawling city constructed inside the webway itself, and this was the Eldar city of Commorragh. Commorragh was originally the greatest of the webway port cities, just of the Eldar, and it was able to transport a fleet to any of the most vital planets of the collective empire by virtue of its many webway portals. Because of this access it granted to far-flung corners of the materium, it was seen as being the most important location in the entire webway.
Okay, so let me get this straight. The webway is a place, really? Like, how does that even work? Because I know the materium is, of course, what I know, and the materium is like weird stuff where there might be cities or something, but they like ever changing and like very probably dreamlike and stuff. I imagine the materium cities to be this dreamlike things that might change a bit, you know, and that contort and stuff. But yeah, that's like my imagination of that currently. But yeah, what about the webway? Like, is it just like a tunnel and there's a city in the tunnel? I don't know. That I don't understand that.
As such, it was too important for any singular state of the Eldar councils to control, so it was instead operated on a more autonomous basis. Because of this, it meant that suspect activities that might not have been possible under the formerly well-organised worlds of the Eldar were far more possible here. Largely due to its high value as a hub within the webway, Commorragh inevitably expanded quickly, in fact so much so that as it spread outward into the void, it began to consume other webway port cities, estates and sub-realms. Commorragh grew larger and more impressive as it fed on and plundered resources. All of this,
Yeah.
of course, remaining largely unseen. The self-serving lords who at this time ruled Commorragh's dens of vice grew in status alongside their adoptive city, initiating more and more of the Eldar into their shadowy depths. It was much through necessity as it was need that Commorragh became a place of focus for the dark cults of the Eldar, the Dark Eldar. It suited their needs perfectly in every respect. Out
Yeah.
of sight, out of mind.
That's
So when
pretty bad.
Slaanesh was finally born into the warp, the psychic shockwave that consumed trillions of Eldar and billions more besides tore reality asunder as the Eye of Terror appeared upon the galaxy as a breach ripped between the materium and immaterium. Whole star systems fell into orgies of horrific cannibalism and violence. The majority of the Eldar race was wiped out in an instant. No matter they were dark cultists or pure Eldar trying to turn back the tide of despair, all were consumed by a cataclysm of terror and pain. Many Eldar planets were either destroyed or violently sucked into the warp itself. In its place now stood a maelstrom of chaos.
Yeah, that's
Slaanesh
pretty
gorged
bad.
upon the incomprehensible, all-consuming agony of the Eldari, and the warp storms that had plagued the galaxy would finally abate. There was no force capable of constraining this event. Slaanesh was such a powerful creation that it consumed the Eldar gods of their ancient mythology. The few Eldar survivors were now left scattered across the galaxy, and for the longest time in a deep shock, unable to comprehend the true horror of what had befallen them.
Yeah, I mean, what did you expect? I mean, that's completely on them. I don't even feel sorry anymore. Like, that's so stupid. That's so stupid. I mean, like those who went away, like these exile people. I hope like we know they kind of survived, so that's cool. But they like just let their culture rot to the core, and yeah, and then they birthed whatever this is. You know, it's pretty like it is sad, but it's like also yeah, their own fault. It's like very, very interesting. Also, probably the guys in the webway survived because Slaanesh was not affecting that. So I guess that's where the Dark Elder come from. That's my guess. So, but I'm pretty sure that's how it is.
Most of all, their inability to prevent it had deeply scarred their sense of superiority and invincibility. But worse would be to come, of course, when they discovered that they were unable to be reborn as they always had been, and were now to some degree mortal entities like the filthy monkey of humanity. Those souls of the Eldar, obliterated by the birth of Slaanesh, were now the captives of She Who Thirsts, and they would endure endless suffering at its behest. While Slaanesh extinguished
What's
the
the
pure
worst
and
that could happen?
depraved alike who had inhabited real space, this was not the case for those who remained in the webway. However, the birth of Slaanesh was so powerful that its psychic shockwaves were felt even in the webway, and it suffered terrible damage from the blast that tore holes through it, ruined some pathways forever, and damaged Eldar constructs within it. Those who had established themselves in and around the area of the webway containing Commorragh survived, and suffered minimal, if any, damage.
That's so
like the
bad.
craft-world Eldar, the Exodites, the Harlequins, they had escaped the unbelievable horror of Slaanesh. Unlike many Eldar who continued to exist in real space, the Eldar of Commorragh felt no need for repentance or atonement. They saw no need to alter their ways, unlike the Puritan Eldar who even now were restructuring their civilization and developing new strict paths to follow.
Yeah, I mean, they might even be strengthened in their beliefs. I mean, if you are like not affected by whatever the frick went down in the materium and the immaterium, you're like, see, we are the chosen ones. It didn't happen to us, so we are right. This was made for us, and it shows us that we are on the right path. Like if you're a zealot or whatever, you will think that. So it's pretty bad.
These were alien concepts to a people who acknowledged no limit to their power or capabilities, and soon enough, though both the surviving Eldar and Dark Eldar would discover there was a continuing dire problem for them. They had both discovered to their horror that they were no longer able to be reborn through the warp
Okay, so
as they
that's
had been for
something.
millions of years.
Okay, they
But
had
for
the
the Dark
problem as
Eldar,
well.
they discovered something even more disturbing.
Uh-oh.
Now, I didn't want to go too heavy on this, is what I originally wrote for the intro to this section, then I scripted out enough for an entire standalone video. So, instead, I've tried to distill down the essence of what I originally wanted to say, and that is a rough sense of the Eldar rebirth and their soul.
Okay, we will do that next time. I've been recording for 40 minutes again. I think I did not do that much commentary here because most of the stuff I knew, I feel. So I hope it's still interesting to you, what I thought. Yeah, we'll do the next one, like part 2, like about the Elder Soul will be the next thing. And yeah, that was like the the prologue to darkness and despair, and yeah, very interesting stuff. I like that I learned more about the fall here than I knew before. Like this was a bit more in depth, and it made sense. Like it made sense that they built their own city and about the webways and how they structured their culture. It was pretty cool to know. So we unfortunately didn't really get to the Dark Elder here. Like we ended with them a bit, and I hope we dive more into what they did. Yeah, I guess they're like I really like I just imagine them as Cenobites currently. And they do that all the time, and yeah, I yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens and what they will do and what I will learn about them. But yeah, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, consider liking, subscribing, and sharing the video. And of course, I hope you have a great day. See you soon. Bye.